Hey folks, it's Bear Gardener, and it's time to get back to game theory and sort of improving your play videos, because I haven't done one for a while because I've been distracted by other stuff. So first of all, as ever, I am a Cards Content Creator, member of the Cards Contributor Program. You can follow me at all the various bits below. Like, subscribe, follow, do all that good stuff. You know the drill. I am excited, actually, to get back to this, because I've not done one of these for a while. So, I've been asked a lot of times about different things and approaches to kind of gameplay and improving your game. One of the things that's been on my mind recently, with the busyness that has gone on with balance patch changes and everything else that's been going on in cards, is that I've been more and more focused on the mental game and the way that it affects things. I myself have been through some ups and downs, and we'll probably talk about that a bit later on in this video. But what we're going to do is look at mindset, and in particular the way that we adapt to conflict, but not just the conflict in front of us, the secondary conflict, the conflict behind the conflict. So when it comes to any form of competitive engagement, whether we're coaching in sports or talking about a competitive game or a competitive environment, whether that be esports or card gaming or football. I mean the American version, but the kicky version also works, which I will perpetually refer to as soccer, but only because as an American football coach I kind of have to keep myself sane. But in cricket, it doesn't really matter what, any competitive environment, there's the need to understand the concept that there are multiple contexts and therefore multiple conflicts. So we talk about obviously there is the primary conflict, the primary competition, which is the thing that you're focused on, which is are you or are you not winning your match or your game or whatever it is that you're involved in. And that is a relevant one, and one that we can talk about. But what's interesting is how much impact external factors have on that. And there's an awful lot of really cool studies into this, which I personally find absolutely fascinating, and some people probably won't. But I spend a lot of time thinking about the psychology of it all and how that impacts things, because over the years I've had to use that, both as a competitive kind of nerd, I suppose, geek nerd, but also as a competitive athlete, and then as a coach. I've had to spend a lot of time trying to understand kind of the game behind the game. And one of the key things to understand is how much what's happening in here and its general effect on our performance also tends to come from what's happening much lower down in our body, from our responses to triggering events, things that impact us in one way or another. So I want, as usual, to use a quote to focus on in talking about this, and one that I found useful in a particular form of conflict environment, but that is applicable in many. So we're going to hop over and take a look at a quote from a person whose name you're almost certainly going to recognise. Right. This is the quote I want to focus on, and this quote is from Bruce Lee, who is an incredibly famous actor and martial artist, who talked an awful lot about many things. There are lots of things I could talk to you about Bruce Lee and his foundation of his own martial art, in fact, which is an entirely different thing and an interesting study. But this quote in particular I found to be immensely useful over the years in any competitive environment. So this quote came about when Bruce Lee was attempting to explain to people the concept of emotional adaptiveness and stability and flexibility in conflict. and we'll get to the detail of that in a bit. But first of all, let's just read the quote and see if we can begin to get it. As usual, like many quotes that come from this particular field and the fields that I personally enjoy reading, there's a degree of kind of floweriness and poetic philosophy to it. So here's how the quote runs. Be like water making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, and it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Okay, so super flowery, obviously, but also very, very insightful in the way that it approaches the struggles that we will have in any competitive environment. And in the case of cards, these struggles can be very rapid. So I was recently talking to a number of people about the psychological game, because there are lots of people who've been finding things frustrating of late. And understanding, I kind of came about because I was admitting that one particular mechanic, which I will not get into here beyond, you can go see other videos in me talking about it, had me tilting, which is to say emotionally responding in a negative form, to the point where I had seriously considered actually taking a break from the game until something got changed. Now, I didn't really want to, so one, I'm very fortunate that a balance patch landed that has lessened the impact, but also I spent some time using tools to work through what was an issue that was impacting my ability to play. My results into this particular mechanic were poor because I was getting tilted, getting emotionally driven and affected by something that then caused me to not concentrate properly. So this boils down to the way that the human body and mind respond to emotional overload and stress. So I'll keep this relatively short because you probably don't want a lecture on psychology from me, and I'm far from qualified to give it to you, and I certainly can't give you a full lecture on the physiology, but I have studied it to a surprisingly great degree because my particular flavour of disability means that I need to be aware of body and mental responses to stresses and changes in a very considered way, and to use tools to manage them. Interestingly, I found a lot of correlation between these tools and tools that were taught to me specifically in martial arts, which were then applied to other sporting forms, and the application, which is what leads me back to the quote that I've decided to come talk to you about in this video. Anyway, the point being, the short form of this is that when we emotionally respond to something annoys us or frustrates us, makes us sad, even makes us happy or over-enthused, over-excitement, these feelings have both physical and mental impacts. The mental impacts people are probably more aware of, but what people don't realise is that many of those mental impacts are actually driven by the biochemical responses happening in our body. Much of our body, from our nervous system through to our digestive system, responds to external stress and change. Even positive emotional responses can have the same thing. It's the reason that sometimes if you are particularly euphoric at, say, a major clubbing event or something similar, if you've been out and you've, even if you haven't had any alcohol, but you've just been really excited or enjoying yourself extremely, you find that your body can be prone to dizzy spells or other forms of hypertension, or just shakes, goosebumps, interesting things that can happen. These, again, goosebumps are a great example of this. If you hear an incredibly emotional piece of music, like the hairs on the back of your head might stand up, or you might get goosebumps or shivers, and these are all responses that are being caused within your body. Now, why is this in any way, shape, or form relevant to cards and the way that you go about playing the game? Well, each of these physical responses also has a psychological impact, because each of these things causes our mind to adjust. It is a distraction. So the human mind is capable of truly, truly astonishing amounts of co-processing and multitasking, and is doing so to an extreme extent constantly, even though you don't realize it, which is why REM sleep is incredibly important. Bonus tip: sleep patterns, learning the advantage of taking a power nap or meditation. These are important ways of allowing your mind to slow down the amount of co-processing it's doing, which will increase its efficacy. Also, the reason that you should not actually drink coffee until you've been awake for at least an hour or two, because then it has a better effect on the... Anyway, I'm getting into a whole different thing. The point is, when we have a response, a visceral, physical response to something, in particular, I'm going to focus on the concept of negative responses to what's happening in game, but it's also equally true if we get overexcited by trying to do the shiny new thing that we really want to do. Our mind has an extra thing to deal with because it needs to re-regulate our body. It needs to use the autonomic nerve system to bring down any physical responses to make sure that our body continues to respond properly and remains safe. Indeed, there are people for whom the response to this can be negatively impacted. I'm one of them. If certain things are broken, then you can suffer all sorts of interesting side effects. In my case, full body paralysis. But the point is, when this happens, that's using runtime in our brain. Now, why is this relevant in something like cards? Because if you are playing cards, if you are concentrating on a competitive game that moves at the speed and has the number of calculative and responsive inputs that a game like cards has, your mind being shifted away in any way from its ability to maintain focus and processing on the thing in front of it is going to negatively impact your win rate. Classic example that will prove the point, even though it is not necessarily an emotional response, but it is a mental cognitive load response in many ways. This isn't the cognitive load video, but we'll cover some cognitive load stuff. When I am streaming and interacting with chat, and looking at the various bits, like my OBS, like my Streamlabs, like my Nightbot, like the various things that are coming into it, and reading messages and responding and interacting with people, and playing games of cards, my win rate drops. Quite substantially, very measurably. Now, I know that it drops measurably because I've actually kept statistics on this, because I am that human. My win rate will generally drop somewhere between 5 and 7%, sometimes as much as 10%, when I'm streaming. The greater the cognitive load of the deck that I'm playing, the greater the impact. Again, unsurprisingly, once you understand the mechanics of it. So, for example, I have said many times, I would not play a full session of self-credit denial or an equally taxing mental deck on stream unless it was in a casual mode or it was organised in a particular way, because I'm very aware that any amount of additional processing increases my likelihood of making mistakes. Anyway, that is a controllable variable. Emotions, you may very well be coming at this and going, but this is an uncontrollable variable there. And this is where I and Mr. Lee are about to disagree with you. You are perfectly capable, with effort, of controlling and mitigating your emotional responses. You may not like it, it may take a lot of hard work, it may be uncomfortable, but you are able to do it. And the point that Mr. Lee is making in this quote, and I am making in this video, is that you will find that it's a good thing if you do, because the positive impact will almost certainly vastly improve both your engagement and enjoyment and your results. Back to Mr. Lee's comment. Why are we talking about water, and what has that got to do with emotional response? Okay, so let's talk about a situation. Let us assume that we are in a game, and that which we are tilted or emotionally agitated by is occurring, whatever that might be. You might be playing mill. You might be playing into some other form of RNG. You might be playing into a particular flavour of aggro deck. Whatever it is that just tilts you wrong in the head and frustrates you because you don't enjoy the experience of playing into it, starts to impact you emotionally, which then starts to impact you physically, which then causes your brain to start to do stuff. And that's where we start into Mr. Lee's response, which is effectively identical, because this is exactly what is happening when you are engaged in physical conflict of whatever form. You are having to manage the load and the co-processing, because indeed you are having emotional responses, but you're also having physical responses, and you may also be taking physical blows or having to adapt to all sorts of changing and threatening circumstances, which is where Mr. Lee is coming from, which is also really applicable to us, just in a lesser way, because of course, hopefully you're not playing a version of cards where every time your opponent deals damage to your HQ you get an electric shock, or something similar. That would be a terrible idea. Anyway, so as this begins to happen, we consider what's in front of us when we're talking about this concept of be like water. Be like water making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. The meaning of this is manifold, actually. We can go into this in a tremendous amount of depth, but the primary meaning of this is to understand that when you approach a difficult situation, the first tool, the most effective tool you have, is to be willing to adapt. In the case of an emotional response like this, the first form of adaptation is what we would consider what generally in psychology is considered to be branching theory, finding a way to break the cycle that you're about to enter into. The emotional response and its continued growth within you creates a circle. You start to have the feeling. The feeling begins to affect you physically. You become more aware of the thing that is actually causing the feeling, because hyper-awareness is a natural response to stress, which then means you feel it more, which means you continue to feel it, and we return round and kick off again and go around again. Breaking this cycle requires adaptation. Mr. Lee's being like water through cracks. When water finds a barrier, will take the path of least resistance. It will find the tiniest crack, and it will attempt to flow fully through that crack and any other cracks that are available. It does not just keep battering against the wall, or whatever the barrier is, in an attempt to get through. It finds the path of least resistance. In the case of our emotional responses to this, the path of least resistance is acceptance. Right, acceptance. What do I mean by acceptance? What I mean is accepting that this is the situation you are in, and you have two choices. Surrender. You actually can just be like, I can't cope with this, I'm done, I don't want to deal with this, step out, accept the loss. Save yourself the time and move on. Or adapt. Accept the situation as a given. It is what it is. You are playing into the deck you're playing into the mechanic you're playing into. You have no control over your opponent's choice of deck construction, and nor should you. And spending a bunch of time and runtime processing on, well, this is a terrible mechanic and I wish they'd remove mill from the game, and why don't we just have aggro-only metas, or any of that stuff, will just continue to cause you to spiral, because you're becoming, as I said earlier, hyper-aware of the thing that's annoying you, which is increasing your response and restarting the emotional cycle of your response to the thing that frustrates you. Instead, what if we accept the situation and start to try and flow into it? What do we have available to us in the archetype or method that we're playing that might allow us a way around? If we're playing an aggro deck into mill, if we concentrate and consider our plays carefully, can we go under it? Can we run fast enough that it's just not going to work? If we're playing into an OTK deck like push, do we have any discard available? Because if we do, if we can cause discard or overdraw, there's a chance that they lose a tool, and they will then get tilted in their own way, and that can be a useful tool for us too. But more importantly, in the case of something like push, if it loses one of its copies of push, you've blunted the threat. Right. So this is what we're talking about when we come to the idea of be like water, making its way through cracks. When I say do not be assertive, that is what I'm talking about when I'm saying don't try to assert the idea that you are right and your opponent is wrong and they have no right to be playing that deck, and how dare they, and then I'll start emoting at them or getting upset with them because how dare you play mill, or how dare you play control, or whatever else you're coming up against, or oh god, how tedious that you're playing OTK. I've been there, I know that feeling. But don't be assertive about it. Because in being assertive about it, you are wasting your energy and distracting your mind. Instead, adjust. Just alter it. Just take a moment, take a breath. Breathing can be very potent here. One clean breath, literally, deeply in through the nose and then out again, either exhaling through the mouth or the nose, but ensuring that you exhale for 7-11 is a good rule to go with. Breathe in, counting to 7, and exhale, counting to 11. So you exhale for somewhat longer than you inhale. About 50% longer, in fact. This causes an internal response. I'm not going to get into the biology of it because you're not here for that. But it does. It causes an internal response which alters the way that your heart rate runs in your body. With even a single breath, you can slow things down enough to ease the pressure, which gives you the chance to adapt. So breathe. Right, on to the next part. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. This is where I was getting to, talking about the adaptation part. If we remain calm, if we flex, if we do not allow ourselves to become rigid because of the frustration, which is a natural response, we want to dig our heels in because it's just wrong, and it's annoying, and I don't want to deal with it, and if you make that face, if you have that emotion, do you feel the rigidity of your body? This is something we talk about in martial arts all the time. That level of rigidity is counterproductive because it slows your response, physically, but also mentally. Instead, if we relax, if we just breathe into it, we can start thinking about ideas disclosing themselves. Like I said before, tools that might come to mind that we can use to try and get around the situation. Pro players in serious competitive all sorts of pursuits, but everything from chess to card gaming and all the way back up again to competitive video games use and should use these same techniques which are used by athletes and competitors to achieve the same goal, which is to give yourself a better chance of winning because you are more aware of possibility when you're not distracted by emotion and frustration. Onward to empty your mind. be formless, shapeless like water. Now this is important. Water is ultimately adaptive, and Bruce Lee goes on to illustrate this point as intensely as he can. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. It literally shapes itself to fit the vessel. If you put water into a bottle, and it becomes the bottle. Teapot, teapot shaped. Right, so this is the idea that you can, by definition, choose to adapt to any situation. For the most part, we are capable of it if we give ourselves the tools. Finally, we reflect on something that hasn't been considered until the end, because it is the least important from the point of view of the hierarchy of response, and yet possibly the most potent tool of them all. We arrive at, now water can flow or it can crash. And this is the secondary part of this. Once water has flowed round obstacles and other things, and then gets to whatever it's about to deal with, it can deliver a huge amount of full body to it because it has flowed through. Now, we talk about this as crashing wave in something like martial arts, the concept of flowing around everything else to then bring as much of yourself as possible into a single point. This is exactly the same as what I'm talking about doing in cards, or any competitive card game, or competitive game generally. I've talked to many athletes about doing this. Bring as much of yourself to the point of contention as possible, and that means flowing around everything else, all of the stuff that's not to do with you, to allow as much of yourself to arrive at the point of actual impact, the crux of the situation, the crucible, as it were, as possible, and then you allow the water to crash, because the impact and the effect that you can have from doing that is truly extraordinary when done well. And even when done only to a light degree, it will have impact. And finally, of course, we close out. Be like water, my friend. Simple reminder. And this is what Bruce Lee is attempting to get across with this. So, here we are, back beyond it, quote gone. So we've talked through it. This is my point. This is the point that I'm trying to make, which is that you can adapt to even the most adversarial or complex or frustrating of situations if you only choose to allow yourself the options. I've talked about one tool for doing this, and that tool is breathing. Another tool is any form of breaking point, a distraction technique. It's why you will often see competitive players in focused or concentrated, limited environments taking a drink. So not to hydrate. I mean, hydrating is good and you should be doing it, but it also allows you to actually break, to literally put a barrier between you and whatever process you're currently going through. It's a distraction. You can do the same by concentrating on a piece of music, by shuffling a deck of cards on the table as you're playing. This is one of the reasons that I used to quite regularly rearrange the cards in my hand when playing physical competitive card games, just shuffling cards in my hand. I'm not doing it to annoy my opponent. I'm not doing it because I want to. I'm doing it because it's a breaking technique, because if I mess them up and then have to put them back in together, what I was doing was bringing my head back to the concentration of what was in front of me, which is what's in my hand, which is what's relevant, not the noise that's going on in an auditorium of however many thousand people, not whoever's watching the game and taking notes, not the whatever my opponent's doing, but what's in front of me in the board state. And by breaking my eyes away from that board state and then bringing them to my hand and then bringing them back again, by changing the focus, I give myself a greater chance to actually understand what's in front of me in a more constructive and effective way. Again, you can also use techniques outside of your chosen times of play. genuinely, meditation, journaling, these are techniques, these are things that are useful. Taking time to clear your head to be at peace is just generally good for you. I recommend it just on principle. But also it's very good for putting yourself in the right state to engage in something, which is why I have regularly encouraged people to meditate before competing. Also, as I say, journaling. Writing your issues down, whatever they are, literally giving them exit. Very recommendedly, by the way, physically, the physical act of taking a pen or a pencil and writing it on paper is more impactful. It has been proven to be more impactful than typing it or audio recording it, voice dictating it. These are all techniques you could try using, but it is more effective to do it because you are creating a contact point while doing it. These are all things that can allow you to break down the barriers of the situation you're in, whether that be issues you've got with your own play style, issues you've got with deck building, issues you've got with the current meta, issues you've got with specific players, issues you've got with the conversation on Discord. Any of these things that can be negatively impacting your experience, you can use techniques to work around. And it's not a joke. It may sound bizarrely kind of over the top and wellness wankery, but the truth is, actually, apologies for the language, I don't normally do, but it's a comment I've heard before. These techniques work, and they do work competitively. They improve your competitive performance. They give you an edge. If you care enough about wanting to get the best experience you can, it is worth considering. And even if you are not competing, even if you're not interested in OCC and all of that stuff, even if all you're interested in is having the best experience possible, isn't it worth using any technique that might help you to get around, past, or at least be more adaptive or accepting of all of those negative emotional responses that can have a very unpleasant impact on your enjoyment of the game? Anyway, this is just a reflection on techniques and ideas. As always, my thoughts, my opinions, but I love this stuff because this is where I live, this is the stuff that interests me. As ever, I hope you find it useful. I really do. I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope you enjoy listening. I hope you if you like this stuff, go try it. Give it a go. The worst you can do is come back and go, I tried it and it just didn't work and I never want to do it again because it feels ridiculous, and that's okay. But I do advise at least giving it a go. Anyway, as always, stay well, be good human beings, and I will catch you next time.